Now what we'll do is implement the passenger detail stateless component. Now you may be thinking that we are using a list at the moment and we're using the ngFor. However, we're going to actually change this because we don't actually need this index anymore. This was simply for representing the number of passengers as a list. So we can actually use directives such as ngFor on our detail components themselves. So what we'll do is a star and then we'll use ngFor and then we'll do let passenger of passengers. So all this will do is basically iterate over this detail component and render a detail component per passenger. The way that we can property bind to this component and pass individual passengers in is because we're using an ngFor, we can actually bind it to the same component. So because we're inside an ngFor, technically we can access the individual passenger. So here we're going to call this passenger detail, and we're going to pass in this passenger into here. So what we'll do is actually copy this logic inside of here, and we'll leave this in there for now. And we'll go into our passenger detail component. What we're going to do is replace this template data. So what we can do is bump this up and neaten things up. So you can see how we're breaking things down into components. Now we're not going to use the index as I've already mentioned. So what we're going to do is just simply delete that. And finally, we can indent these. So this is what you should be looking at the moment. Now, because we're binding to a property called detail, these passenger objects aren't going to be available. So what we'll do is rename them to detail because in our dashboard component, we are binding to a property called detail, which is going to give us each individual passenger. And you may have guessed by now, we're going to create a property called detail, which is not going to be an array of passengers. It's just going to be a single passenger. So again, we need to go and import our TypeScript model. So we can go import passenger and then from ... and then models / passenger and then interface. So we're importing this passenger and we're saying that the detail should be a passenger. The final step is that we need to import the input. So we just grab the input from the Angular core. We can scroll down to our component and we can simply @input. And now we've marked this property as that it's expected to be a piece of input data. So this will work as expected when we go back to the browser and check this out. So you can see we have airline passengers. This is one component with the total checked in. And then we have this new list of unstyled passengers. And because in our container component, we actually have all the styles, we have the original list. So what we're going to do now is remove this stuff and we'll actually go and copy the styles across into these components. So inside of our passenger dashboard component, we have status and checked in. So we can just simply copy this and we'll just delete this and save this out. Inside our passenger detail component, we can do style URLs and we'll create this SAS file. So we'll do passenger-detail.component.scss. So now we've created the reference to this SAS file, we need to actually create this new file. So we'll do passenger-detail.component.scss. Then we can just simply paste this in, save it out, and we'll go back to the browser and make sure that all of our styles are working against all of our input data because we've now swapped them over to using detail rather than passenger. So you can see here that we have our first component and we have the second components that are listed out. However, our list actually has duplicate items because our container component still contains the ngFor with the list items inside. So what we'll do is go back and actually remove those, and that will finish off this video. So inside the dashboard component, we can keep our template super clean because we have now delegated all of this logic down into particular components. So after we've removed that, you can see that our template has become much cleaner. We have just two components. One is having a binding called items, and we're passing the passengers in. The second one is the passenger detail component, which we're using an ngFor, and we're looping over the passengers. Each passenger is then getting passed into a detail property, and they are getting managed and rendered inside of each other. So now we've worked out how to use an @input decorator in Angular to create our first stateless components that actually work. In the next video, we're going to learn how to make some changes to them by using events to then send them back up to the parent.